welcome back. Where we left off is we had all of these headers active and visible. It would sure be helpful if we had some nav buttons that we could make use of to help us just move in between the layers. And these nav buttons need to have a very particular behavior, Nate. It's almost like they have a very particular set of skills.
Wow, are you going like Liam Neeson with this?
That's about as far as I could go, but yeah.
I feel like you have to now try to do an impression.
Nope.
What are these particular set of skills?
The particular set of skills that these buttons need to be able to do is only have one layer on at a time.
That sounds more like Highlander than Taken, honestly.
It kind of does. There can only be one. We need these buttons to be able to turn on and off the layers and only have one of them on at a time. This behavior is one of the oldest behaviors in the world of thinking about user interfaces. It's called interlocking buttons. A really common example was radio presets as far back as they put radios in cars. When you poke one, at least the way it used to work is when you poked one, there literally was like gears on the inside that would rotate, and on the radio in particular, it would rotate the dial to a particular predetermined station. We're going to make some interlocking buttons. And so, well, first, what we need to do is, we're going to adopt this practice during this class. Basically, we're going to do the UI stuff first, and then we're going to get into the scripting. Do you have to do it necessarily that way? Not always, but for us, we're going to deploy our buttons and then we're going to work on programming them. And so where we're going to get our buttons that we're looking for is actually right here in the toolbox. Let's grab, actually, right here, the fourth one down, we are going to use toggles.
Now, this is the first major deviation from the way that we accomplished this in the fundamentals class and the intermediate class. In the fundamentals class, we just grabbed a component that naturally had interlocking functionality built in within it already. In the block controller class, we created our own controls from the block controller component and added them in here. Here we're using the UCI toolbox, which you may have never touched before, and for good reason. The toolbox is a different way of approaching building UCIs, where you literally build them with the buttons first, and then you connect them to logic later on. It's kind of exciting.
So what have I done? I have pulled in 3 particular toggle buttons and dropped them onto my UCI. And here they are. And there's actually a number of things to talk about them. One is they're kind of tiny. Nate, they're pretty tiny. Could you actually make use of these little tic-tac buttons?
Well, my fingers have evolved into needles. Through years of careful genetic breeding. So yes.
Let's deal with the size. I'm going to multi-select all of them. And here they are. Here is their graphic properties over here on the right. Their size, by default, they're 36 by 16, little tiny tic tacs. I'm going to make my buttons 200 by 90. Now, why did I make them 200 by 90? Well, there's actually a bunch of science and research that goes into how big buttons should be, and some of it has to do with what are their relative importance. And given that these are navigation buttons and that they are of primary importance for the use in the UCI, they should be on the larger side, okay? As a matter of style, I am choosing to adopt certain standard sizes. And for me, the standard size of my big buttons are going to be 200 by 90. You are welcome to play around for yourself, but I know that 200 by 90 is a good, healthy answer for this size of UCI. So there we are, 200 by 90, nice, big, we can touch them, it's good. However, they are also kind of jumbled over each other. So once again, I'm going to select all of them, and then I could like spread them around, but I'm also going to introduce you to some additional tools here. Right click, and then one of my favorites is the pack, right? So if I pack according to the top, oh, look at that, that's nice. I'm also going to right click and use the put in the horizontal center of the page, and that shimmied them all horizontally. And then I'm just going to use my little keyboard here, and I'm just going to perpetually shove them south. Now that's actually a relevant question. Why am I putting them at the bottom of the page? If you go to a web page, you might think about like all the navigation of a web page is up at the top. Like, what's the deal? Why don't we put ours up at the top? Well, most normal people use one of these dudes to actually navigate on a web page. And the little cursor there is teeny tiny, and you can kind of see through it and around it, and it's quite okay. But Nate, since you're evolving, has your fingers also become transparent?
No, not at all. In fact, the rest of them have grown larger to compensate for the needle-sized end of the finger, which means that you're right. If I navigate at the button at the top of the screen, I'm completely obscuring the entire screen. I don't know if the thing I'm looking for is visible now.
Yep. So I like to put particularly my nav buttons at the bottom of the screen. Then I have a pretty good chance of seeing what I'm trying to choose and getting immediate visual confirmation of, oh yes, you have indeed picked the correct page that you were intending to. This might seem like a really small deal. It actually is of paramount importance, because what you're doing is you are beginning to curate the user experience by being thoughtful about the way you lay out the user interface. This is half or more of doing good programming scopes of work, is making user interfaces that people delight in, that people can use intuitively.
Yeah. Like if you're watching these videos right now and you're thinking, hey, I came here for Lua. Why are we spending all this time just talking about button size? It's because all of the good programming in the world is meaningless if you can't provide that to the end user in a way that makes sense to them and is easy to use. And it all falls under the scope of control. Half of this course is called Control and UCI. So we want to make sure that you're keeping that in mind, creating UCIs that are intuitive and easy to use at all times, while then backing it up with all the good coding under the hood.
Yep. So that brings me to the next point. What should we name these buttons, Nate?
Well, I'm right ahead of you. Mine are all going to be called Nate.
We're not going to call them Nate, Nate, and Nate. That's kind of like my brother Daryl and my other brother Daryl.
Another topical reference from young man Jeff Perkins.
Exactly. All right, what are we going to name these things? Well, by default, they actually came in as control_1, control_2, and control_3. Those are bad names, but also they don't have any labels on them. In fact, in Q-SYS, we call labels legends. So what should we name them? We have 3 layers, we have 3 buttons. Well, this is another one of those opportunities for us to think about the user experience. As we think about our room, what is probably the first thing that our user is going to want to do when they walk into the room? What is the last thing they're probably going to want to do when they walk into the room? The last thing they're going to want to do is probably control the cameras. The first thing they're probably going to want to do is probably do something about adjusting the lights and the shades. So since in my cultural context of being here in, I happen to live in North America, in my cultural context, we do things typically from left to right. And so for me, leftmost means more primary, and rightmost means further down on the importance list. So the primary position really probably should be the room's controls. So let's do this. Let's name each of these as room, display, and cameras. You may be saying to yourself, but those are super tiny, I can't read them. Yes, I agree. So also come over here, make that something you can read. We do also, right, we've applied a legend to these controls, but we also need to apply control names. So let's come up in the properties and name these things. And I'm going to use this particular naming system. And again, everything I've said up to now about having a naming system, and about you guys figuring out what makes a lot of sense to you. Know that I'm going to use a naming system that's going to work really well within the context of this academic course. And at times it might feel a little bit extra, and that's on purpose. Because part of what I believe is going to happen is you're going to take this class, and then next week you're going to come back into this file to get a really good idea out of it. And I really want you to be like, oh yeah, I actually saw how all of this went together. And half of that is because we're using names that are a little bit descriptive, more descriptive than you might normally choose. So I'm going to name my button here the prefix BTN because it's a button, Nate.
That is very descriptive.
It is. And it is the nav button for room. So capital N in nav and capital R in room. So BTN nav room, BTN nav displays, and lastly, BTN nav cameras.
Hey Jeff, would you explain a little bit? You mentioned you said that when you renamed it on the UCI that you were changing the legend.
Yes.
But that didn't change the control name.
No.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between why there's a difference at all between a control name and what is actually displaying on that control?
There are two different attributes of the control. One is what label do you want on it, and the other is literally what is its name, okay? It's kind of like saying, my name is Jeff, and I'm wearing a blue bow tie, okay? It's just two different things about me. We have now laid out our UCI, we've laid out our controls. We are ready to start trying to make the magic happen. But I think we probably should take a break right here, and we'll see you in the next episode.